Last week, Rue was buried up to her neck in dirt, with Alamo charging at her on horseback. Cassie was signing contracts she didn't fully understand with a manager she couldn't fully trust, and Maddie was shaking hands with one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles. And if you thought things couldn't get any more intense, any more suffocating, any more desperate, Episode 6 is about to prove you completely wrong. Because here's the thing about digging a hole. At some point, you dig so deep that you can't climb back out. And that's exactly where every single one of these women finds themselves right now. Cassie is chasing fame so hard, she can't see the people around her turning her into a product. Rue is playing both sides of a war that will destroy her the moment either side figures out what she's doing. And Maddie just walked into a room full of wolves and convinced herself she's the one holding the leash. All three of them think they're winning. All three of them are wrong. And Episode 6 is where the cracks don't just show, they shatter. This is the Euphoria Season 3, Episode 6 breakdown. And just so you know, this video contains spoilers. Cassie's story this season has always been about one thing at its core, and that thing is hunger. Not hunger in a metaphorical, poetic sense, but raw, almost animalistic hunger for attention, for validation, for money, for fame, and for the feeling that she matters. We saw it last week when she wired Nate $75,000 not because she had to, but because some part of her still needed him to need her. We saw it when she was willing to walk away from Maddie the moment Brandon offered her something that looked shinier and bigger and more important. And we saw it when she signed that contract without truly understanding what she was agreeing to, because in that moment, all she could see was the opportunity in front of her and not the cage that was being built around her. That has always been Cassie's fatal flaw. She doesn't look at the full picture. She looks at the brightest part of it and walks towards it like a moth walking towards a flame, completely unaware that the closer she gets, the more danger she's in. And Episode 6 accelerates all of that. The social media numbers are climbing. The attention is growing. The brand deals are coming in. On the surface, Cassie's life looks like exactly what she always dreamed it would be. She's the girl that everyone is talking about. She's the face that people are clicking on. She's the name that's being mentioned in rooms she's never even been in. And for someone like Cassie, who has spent her entire life feeling like she was one step behind, one level below, always the supporting character in someone else's story, this feeling is intoxicating. It's the most powerful drug she's ever taken, and she is fully addicted. The problem is that the people around her are not celebrating her success. They are feeding off of it. Maddie is the most obvious example of this, and Episode 6 makes it even clearer just how calculated Maddie's entire approach to managing Cassie really is. That contract that Cassie signed last week was not written in Cassie's favor. It was written in Maddie's favor, and it was designed specifically to ensure that no matter what Cassie does, no matter how big she gets, no matter how many opportunities come knocking on her door, Maddie gets her cut. Maddie gets her percentage. Maddie gets her leverage. And what makes it even more unsettling is that Cassie still refers to Maddie as her best friend. She said it last week, and even Maddie looked confused when she heard it, because Maddie knows exactly what she's doing. Maddie is not managing Cassie out of loyalty or love or friendship. She is managing Cassie because Cassie is a product, and right now, that product is selling incredibly well. But here's where Episode 6 starts to shift. The dynamic in a way that is deeply uncomfortable to watch. Because Maddie is no longer just managing Cassie. She's expanding. She's taken on new clients through Alamo's network. She's got Magic and Kitty, girls who, as we discussed last week, are quite literally willing to do anything to make money. Which means they are going to generate income in ways that Cassie simply won't. And as Maddie starts splitting her attention, as she starts giving her time and her energy to these new clients, Cassie starts to feel it. Cassie starts to notice that Maddie isn't as available as she used to be. The calls are shorter. The responses are slower. The enthusiasm is slightly more muted. And for Cassie, whose entire emotional world revolves around feeling seen and prioritized, this is not something she can quietly accept. The jealousy begins to creep in. And jealousy in Cassie doesn't simmer quietly. It builds and builds and builds until it explodes in a way that affects everyone around her. We've seen it before with the situation with Nate and Maddie back in the earlier seasons. We've seen how Cassie behaves when she feels like she's losing something or someone to somebody else. And that same energy is starting to resurface here. Except this time the stakes are completely different. This time it's not just about a boy, it's about her career, her income, her identity, and the version of herself she's been building since she arrived in Los Angeles. If Maddie starts pulling away, if Cassie starts feeling like she's being deprioritized, she's going to start making decisions that are driven by emotion rather than logic. And in the world that she's currently operating in, emotional decisions are the most dangerous kind. Brandon is still circling, and Nate is still calling. And both of them represent paths that Cassie could go down if Maddie continues to pull her focus elsewhere. Brandon wants Cassie in his creator house, surrounded by his people, operating under his roof, which would give him a level of influence over her that Maddie currently holds. And Nate, broke and desperate and slowly losing fingers, still somehow has an emotional hold on Cassie that defies all logic. He was actively encouraging her last week to get closer to Brandon, to create intimate content with him, because Nate's survival at this point depends entirely on the money that Cassie sends him. He doesn't care about her well-being. He doesn't care about what it costs her. He cares about the wire transfers, and he knows exactly which emotional buttons to press to make sure they keep coming. What episode 6 does so effectively is it shows us that Cassie is not just being used by one person. She is being used by everyone. Maddie is using her for the percentage. Brandon is using her for the content, and the followers, and the revenue. Nate is using her for the money, and none of them, not a single one of the people closest to her, is actually looking out for her. Lexi tried to. Lexi was always the one person in Cassie's life who saw her clearly and still chose to love her. But the falling out between them over the interview and everything that came with Cassie's meteoric rise means that safety net is gone. Cassie is surrounded by people who want something from her and nobody who wants something for her. And she doesn't see it. She genuinely doesn't see it. And that is what makes her story in episode 6 so deeply tragic to watch, because you can see the walls closing in on her even as she's smiling for the camera. The uncomfortable scenes that we've been getting with Cassie all season don't let up in episode 6 either. If anything, they intensify. Because the further she goes down this road, the more she is willing to compromise, the more she is willing to subject herself to things that the old Cassie, the Cassie from East Highland, would never have imagined doing. And what's heartbreaking is that she doesn't frame it as compromise. She frames it as ambition. She frames it as hustle. She frames it as doing what it takes. And in a way, she's right, because in the world she's entered, doing what it takes is exactly what it takes. But there is a version of this story where doing what it takes costs Cassie everything that actually matters. And episode 6 is the episode where you start to genuinely believe that version of the story might be exactly where this is all heading. Rue's story this season has always been a tightrope walk. And not the kind of tightrope walk where there's a safety net underneath. The kind where you're 50 stories up, the wind is picking up, the rope is fraying at both ends, and the people on either side of you are pulling in opposite directions. That is exactly the situation that Rue has been living in since she walked into Alamo's world. And episode 6 makes it abundantly clear that the rope is not going to hold for much longer. Because last week ended with Rue buried up to her neck in dirt, Alamo charging at her on horseback, and the very real possibility that the people she had been secretly working against had finally figured out what she was doing. And while she survived that moment, while the horseback charge turned out to be a warning rather than an execution, the damage that it did to Rue's position inside Alamo's world is something that cannot be undone. You don't bury someone in the ground just to say hello. You bury someone in the ground to send a message. And the message was received loud and clear. What episode 6 explores with Rue is the psychological aftermath of that moment. Because surviving something like that doesn't just leave you shaken, it leaves you fundamentally changed. Rue has been in dangerous situations before. She has been in rooms with dangerous people before. She has watched Bishop pull out power tools and use them on people who crossed the wrong line. She has seen what happens to people who Alamo decides he can no longer trust. But there is something completely different about being the one in the ground. There is something completely different about looking up at the sky from a hole that you dug yourself, with dirt packed around your shoulders and your neck and your chin, knowing that you are completely powerless and that your survival in that moment depends entirely on the mood of a man on a horse. That is not something you shake off. That stays with you. And for Rue, who has spent years numbing herself to the world around her through substance and through detachment and through the carefully constructed emotional walls she built to keep herself from feeling too much, this is the kind of moment that breaks through every single one of those walls, and the DEA knows it. That's the part of episode 6 that makes Rue's storyline feel so suffocating and so endlessly complex. Because the DEA is not in the business of caring about Rue's emotional state. They are not concerned with the fact that she was just buried in the ground by one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles. What they are concerned about is whether or not she is still useful to them. And after the situation with Faze Boy last week, where Rue managed to get him on the phone and get him to incriminate himself just at the moment when the DEA was about to cut ties with her completely, she bought herself more time. But buying time is not the same as being safe. Buying time is just delaying the inevitable. And what episode 6 starts to make painfully clear is that the inevitable is getting closer and closer with every single decision that Rue makes. The trust issue is the thing that is going to destroy her. Because Alamo's suspicion didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built over time, through small moments and small inconsistencies that individually didn't mean much but collectively started. To paint a picture. The fact that Rue didn't identify Lore's crew during the robbery based on their voices alone, despite knowing them well enough to have recognized them, was the detail that cracked things open. Alamo is not a stupid man. He is calculating, and he is patient, and he pays attention to things that other people would overlook. And when he replayed that situation in his mind and started asking himself why Rue would wait until she saw facelips on the video to call it out, the answer he arrived at was not a comfortable one for Rue. It suggested involvement. It suggested complicity. It suggested that Rue might not be who she had been presenting herself as this entire time. Bishop had been saying it before anyone else would listen. Bishop gave Rue the heebie-jeebies from the beginning and said that things had started going wrong the moment she turned up. And while Alamo didn't act on that immediately, while he gave Rue the benefit of the doubt longer than Bishop wanted him to, the burial scene last week showed that Alamo had finally started listening. And in episode 6, the consequences of that shift in Alamo's thinking become even more pronounced. Because Alamo doesn't operate on suspicion alone. Alamo operates on information. And now that he is actively looking at Rue through a suspicious lens, every single thing she does is being filtered through that lens. Every conversation she has, every phone call she makes, every moment where her reaction to something is slightly off or slightly delayed or slightly too composed. All of it is being logged and assessed and measured against what Alamo thinks he knows about her. Magic is also a problem in episode 6 that Rue cannot afford to ignore. Because Magic has been vocal about not trusting Rue from the very beginning. And now that Magic is being brought into Maddie's orbit through Alamo's network, the web of connections between all of these characters is tightening in a way that creates enormous risk for Rue specifically. Magic doesn't just dislike Rue. Magic actively believes that Rue is a liability. And Magic is now in a position where her voice carries weight, where what she says to the right person at the right moment could accelerate everything that Rue has been trying to prevent. The problem is that Rue can't move against Magic without drawing more attention to herself. She can't push back too hard without looking like she has something